Hello again, welcome to Kimmel Bay's daily vlog. We continue in the gems from Isaiah, and today we're on Isaiah chapter 37, verses 21 to 38, and it's headed Sennacherib's Fall. There's an old saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. I remember my mother using this about a politician who'd fallen from grace many years ago. He'd forgotten where he came from. He'd forgotten his humble beginnings, is what she meant. That's another old saying. The saying is thought, the one about the bigger they are, the harder they fall, referring to David's victory over the giant Goliath. And it's amazing how many sayings can be traced back to the Bible, often used by those who've never read it and haven't a clue where the saying originated. Sennacherib certainly was an example of what happens to someone who puts themselves above everybody else, or, in this account, he put himself above God. A lesson for today: beware all who would mock God or use his name as a curse word. God will not be mocked. There will be an accounting one day. We continue in chapter 37, following Hezekiah, who's in complete panic, and he's turned to God in prayer. Why is it that sometimes it's only when we're out of all other options, with nowhere else to go, that we turn to God? At the end of yesterday's reading, verse 20, we read the end of Hezekiah's prayer. Now, Lord our God, deliver us from his hand, meaning the king of Assyria, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, Lord, are the only God. The Assyrians may have many soldiers, many weapons, but the people of Judah have got God on their side. Verse 21, God answers Hezekiah's prayer, but not directly to Hezekiah. His answer comes through the prophet Isaiah. Have you ever found that when you've asked God to step in and sort your problem out, that the answer doesn't come into your head, into your mind? It comes from someone else. The phone will ring. You receive a card or a letter, or you hear a sermon that seems to be speaking straight into your situation. I no longer say to the person God is using to help me, how did you know? I know how they know. Isaiah says, this is what God says to you, Hezekiah, because you have prayed to me about Sennacherib. This is the word the Lord has spoken against him. Verse 22, virgin daughter Zion despises and mocks you. Virgin daughter, a bride. The church is spoken of as a bride. This means God's people, also God's bride. Verse 23, who is it that you have ridiculed and blasphemed? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted your eyes in pride? Against the Holy One of Israel. By your messengers you have ridiculed the Lord, and you have said, with my many chariots I have ascended the heights of the mountains, the utmost heights of Lebanon. I have cut down its tallest cedars, the choicest of its junipers, and on it goes. The cedars were special. They were used in the building of the temple. Also the junipers, the cypress trees, were much valued trees. And he destroyed them, and he gloated about it. And he goes on until God says, have you not heard? Long ago I ordained it. In the days of old I planned it. In other words, I have been the one pulling your strings, Sennacherib. I know where you are, and when you come, and when you go. There's a phrase that I think from long ago, I think our boys were arguing over one of them taking something belonging to the other, and the threat was, if you do that again, be afraid, be very afraid. And God's saying this to Sennacherib, be very afraid of you crossing me. I know how you rage against me, God says, and because your insolence has reached my ears, I will put my hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth, and I will make you return by the way you came. In chapter 36, verse 10, Sennacherib, through his field commander, tells Hezekiah, the Lord himself told me to march against this country and destroy it, But Sennacherib has got above himself. He thought himself greater than God. He thought to take Jerusalem would be like taking the world. A farmer puts a ring in a bull's nose to control it, to make it go where he wants it to go. The same with a bit in a horse's mouth, for control. Sennacherib will do what God wants him to do eventually, because God is the one in control. This will be the sign for you, Hezekiah. This year you will eat what grows by itself, and the second year what grows from that. Crops couldn't be sown because of the Assyrian soldiers tramping all over the land. The people would have to search for what managed to come up. Remember, Jerusalem was under siege for 2, maybe 3 years. There were probably many refugees from the surrounding cities that Sennacherib had destroyed, all seeking refuge there. Food would be in short supply. Hezekiah, realizing they were in trouble and Sennacherib's armies were getting closer, wisely blocked up the springs and watercourses outside the city. No way was he going to allow Sennacherib's soldiers to have control over the water. He had many workers dig a tunnel from the pool of Siloam within the city walls to the Gihon spring in the Kidron Valley outside the walls. 533 meters long. That's 1,748 feet for those of us still using old money. They may have been under siege, but they would have fresh water. You can read all about this in the second book of Chronicles, chapter 32, verses 2 to 4. Fascinating when you consider the tools that they would have to use, not like the tools, the mechanical things that are available today. Recently on a Christian TV channel, a young man spoke of walking through Hezekiah's tunnel. It took him 20 minutes and water was at chest height. To continue with verse 30, the good news. This will be the sign for you, Hezekiah. In the 3rd year after the siege is over, you will sow and reap, plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They would have a harvest. Verse 35, God says, I will defend this city and save it, for my sake and for the sake of my servant David, meaning the remnant that he would gather together. Again, we hear the remnant as in Isaiah chapter 11. The siege of Jerusalem was in 701 BC. In 1830, Sennacherib's prison detailing the campaign against Judah was found in the ruins of Nineveh, Iraq. It's a cylindrical object, not very big, and it states on it that Sennacherib conquered 46 cities in Judah and trapped Hezekiah in the city behind the walls of Jerusalem like a caged bird. He doesn't say that he actually failed to conquer Jerusalem. And there is I don't know if it's the original or a copy of this in the British Museum and in a museum in Chicago. In verse 36, the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. You remember when Peter cut off the ear of the high priest's servant in the Garden of Gethsemane, Matthew 26 and 53. Jesus said, put away your sword. My Father can send 12 legions of angels. If one angel can cause such destruction, destroying 185,000, think what 12 legions could have done had Jesus so wished. The lesson for us, don't mess with angels. It's interesting the way Isaiah tells us what happened next. Verse 37, so Sennacherib, king of Assyria, broke camp and withdrew. I imagine he did. It's thought that a plague had hit them. That was what some people think, that the camp might have been overrun with rats and caused bubonic plague. We don't know. But in that heat, with 185,000 rotting corpses, none of the survivors nor the king would hang around, would they? What happened to King Sennacherib? In the second book of Chronicles, chapter 12, verse 22, which is just a small amount in the back of the Isaiah chapter 37, Chronicles tells us that he withdrew to his own land, meaning Nineveh, in disgrace. Some 20 years later, we read that one day he went to the temple of his god, Nisroch, and some of his sons, his own flesh and blood, came in and cut him down with a sword. In her notes on this passage, Tony says that this account encourages us to see events from heaven's perspective. We sometimes have our eyes on just the events as they're happening, and we fail to ask what God's purpose is in all of it. This challenges us because life is very unfair at times, and we can only see what's in front of us. But like the pandemic, God is in it with us, whatever it is. Often there's a reason, and that reason, when we come through it, can cause us to change direction in our lives. How do we cope with this? Stay close to God. Talk to him. Pray. Give time to him. Not just the odd moment that you have to fill. Set time aside. Make an appointment with him, because he's always waiting. God bless you. Thank you for listening. I'll be praying for you.